My wife's affair partner turned out to be my new boss. The man sleeping with my wife became my boss at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and by 9:15 he had assigned me to investigate the fraud they were committing together. I recognized Adrian Vale before the chief executive finished introducing him. I knew the shape of his hands from a photograph Mallory had forgotten to delete. I knew the silver watch on his wrist from its reflection in a hotel mirror. I knew the low, deliberate voice because I had once heard it through our bedroom wall when my wife thought I was asleep and took his call in the hallway. For 3 weeks, I had been gathering proof of her affair and preparing to confront her after I understood how long it had lasted. I had not expected the other man to walk into the headquarters of Calder Systems wearing a new executive badge and accept applause as our chief operating officer. He knew me too. His gaze crossed the conference room, found my face, and paused for less than a second. There was no surprise in it. Only calculation. That was the moment I understood the promotion had not brought him accidentally into my life. He had known where I worked. He had known my title, my team, and probably my salary. Mallory had given him enough of our marriage to study me before I ever saw him clearly. My name is Tessa Morgan. At the time, I had been married to Mallory for 7 years and employed by Calder for 9. I worked in operational risk, which sounded abstract until something expensive went wrong. My team traced irregular payments, tested vendor controls, and identified the quiet gaps between what executives promised and what systems actually did. I was not senior enough to appear in annual reports, but I knew where decisions left fingerprints. Adrian's first presentation was about discipline. Calder manufactured monitoring equipment for hospitals, and the company had expanded too quickly after winning several government contracts. Margins were narrowing. Delivery dates were slipping. Adrian said he had been hired to simplify operations, consolidate suppliers, and restore accountability. Then he announced a special review of Northbridge Clinical Logistics, a consulting and distribution vendor whose invoices had tripled in 18 months. He placed me in charge. The assignment should have been routine. Instead, it felt like being handed a sealed box by someone who already knew what was inside. Northbridge had been flagged by our payment monitoring software after it divided large invoices into amounts just below the threshold requiring executive committee approval. The vendor also billed for warehouse optimization, freight coordination, and regulatory consulting, 3 categories broad enough to conceal almost anything. Adrian said he wanted a preliminary report in 10 business days. He directed me to report only to him. My manager, Priya Shah, looked uneasy. Special investigations normally reported through her to the audit committee, especially when executive-approved vendors were involved. Adrian framed the altered reporting line as efficiency. Everyone else heard authority. I heard an attempt to control what I found. I accepted the assignment without mentioning Mallory. That decision has been called cold by people who learned the story later. They imagine a betrayed spouse should react immediately, stand, accuse, throw a glass, demand truth in front of witnesses. But shock does not always produce noise. Mine produced inventory. Adrian had access to my employment. Mallory had access to my home, my devices, and years of private conversations. If I revealed what I knew before securing my finances, records, and legal position, I would give 2 coordinated people time to erase whatever they feared. I spent the remainder of the meeting taking notes. At lunch, I used a personal phone Mallory had never seen to call a family law attorney. By afternoon, I had scheduled a consultation, changed the password to my individual bank account, and requested copies of our tax returns from the accountant. I did not touch our joint money. I did not forward company records to myself. I did not search Adrian's name on Calder equipment. The distinction between being careful and being reckless was going to matter. When I arrived home, Mallory was making pasta. She worked as an independent brand strategist and often complained about clients who expected urgent revisions. That evening, she seemed unusually attentive. She poured wine, asked about my day, and listened with the concentrated brightness of someone waiting for a specific fact. I told her Calder had hired a new chief operating officer, but did not say his name. Her hand stopped for an instant above the stove. Then she asked whether the change affected me. I said I had received a major assignment. She smiled and told me this might finally be my chance to move into leadership. The cruelty of that encouragement was so precise that I almost admired it. She knew the man evaluating my future had been in her bed. The affair had first surfaced through a parking receipt. Mallory came home from a 2-day client trip with a hotel charge on our shared card and a receipt from a parking garage 40 miles away from the hotel she claimed to have used. When I asked, she said the client had changed venues. Her answer arrived too quickly. I checked our photo backup, not because I was proud of suspicion, but because the account was shared and automatically synchronized. In a recently deleted folder, I found 3 images taken in a hotel room. Mallory appeared in only one. In another, a man's hand rested on the edge of the bed. The silver watch displayed a small black triangle near the crown. The third image caught his reflection in a mirror: dark hair, narrow face, and just enough of a profile to recognize later. There were also message screenshots. Mallory had deleted the original thread but kept images of several exchanges, perhaps because secrecy makes some people sentimental. The contact was saved as AV. One message referred to "when the restructuring closes." Another said Tessa would not understand until the decision was already made. I had assumed the decision was divorce. Now I knew restructuring meant Calder. The next morning, I began the Northbridge review inside the documented scope Adrian had given me. I preserved the assignment email, logged every database query, and asked Priya to confirm our standard investigative protocol in writing. She did, copying legal counsel. Adrian replied that he expected speed but did not object. Northbridge's vendor file was thin. It had been approved 14 months earlier through an expedited process sponsored by our former COO, who retired soon afterward. The conflict of interest form declared no relationship between the vendor's principals and Calder employees or executives. The listed owner was a woman named Elaine Cross. Her business address was a suite rented from a corporate services company. Her professional history consisted of 2 dissolved marketing firms and a consulting biography with no details that could be verified. The bank account receiving Calder's payments had changed 3 times. I matched invoice dates against shipping records. Northbridge billed for managing deliveries that never occurred, charged regulatory fees in states where Calder sold no equipment, and claimed thousands of consulting hours during holiday weeks. Several invoice descriptions copied sentences from internal planning documents. Those planning documents belonged to Mallory. 6 months earlier, Calder's marketing division had hired her for a small messaging project through an agency. The engagement ended after 8 weeks. She told me the client was a medical technology company, but said confidentiality prevented her from naming it. I had accepted that boundary because my own work required discretion. Now, fragments of her proposals appeared in Northbridge invoices as proof of operational services. I did not yet know whether she had created the false invoices or whether Adrian had used her work as camouflage. I only knew my marriage was inside the investigation. On the 3rd day, Adrian called me to his office. He had replaced the former COO's family photographs with abstract black and white prints and positioned his desk so visitors faced the windows while he faced the door. He asked what I had found. I gave him a limited factual update: inconsistent services, incomplete ownership records, and payment patterns requiring expansion of the review. He asked whether the problems looked like ordinary vendor sloppiness. I said it was too early to conclude. He leaned back and studied me. Then he mentioned Mallory by name. He said she had once consulted for Calder and asked whether that created a conflict for me. His tone suggested concern, but the question was a probe. He wanted to know whether I had connected her to Northbridge. More importantly, he wanted my acknowledgement of a conflict before I knew who else was involved. I told him I had discovered her prior engagement during the review and would follow company disclosure procedures. I did not reveal that she was my wife. Our marriage was already listed in my annual employee disclosure, and he knew it. Adrian said there was no need to complicate a preliminary inquiry. He suggested I exclude any records connected to Mallory's old project because marketing work fell outside the assignment. I documented the instruction in a follow-up email. He did not respond. Priya did. She asked to meet off-site. We sat in a busy cafe where no one could hear us clearly. Priya had worked at Calder long enough to recognize an executive trying to narrow evidence. She said Adrian's hiring had happened with unusual speed. The board had interviewed him while the former COO was still negotiating retirement, and a private equity investor with 2 seats on the board had strongly promoted him. His previous company described his departure as voluntary, but Priya had heard there was an undisclosed dispute involving procurement. I told her Mallory had conducted work appearing in Northbridge's invoices. I did not tell her about the affair. Priya advised me to submit a formal conflict disclosure to the chief legal officer and ask for independent oversight. That protected the investigation and me. The legal officer, Raymond Cho, acknowledged my disclosure within an hour. He reassigned supervision from Adrian to Priya and instructed us to preserve all related records. Adrian called the change bureaucratic, but could not reverse it without creating a visible trail. That night, Mallory asked why I had been distant. I nearly laughed. For years, I had explained every mood to her, even the ones I did not fully understand. Now she was measuring the silence she had created and treating it as my failure to communicate. I said work was complicated. She told me not to let Calder consume our life. Then her phone lit on the counter. She turned it face down before I could read the screen, but the gesture was unnecessary. I already knew. At my attorney's recommendation, I had moved copies of personal financial records and sentimental belongings to a safe deposit box. I changed the password to my email and enabled alerts on our home equity line. The alerts produced their first result the next morning. Mallory had requested information about increasing the credit limit by $150,000. She had not submitted an application, so no money had moved. But the timing mattered. Our accountant provided 3 years of tax documents. Mallory's business income had declined sharply, though she had told me it was growing. She had also created an entity called Morrow Strategy Partners that did not appear on our joint returns. The company's registered address matched the corporate services suite used by Northbridge. I gave the public corporate records to my divorce attorney, not to Calder. I gave Calder only the information obtained through authorized company systems and our approved vendor verification service. Maintaining that separation became an act of survival. Adrian was waiting for me to misuse access so he could transform my discovery into misconduct. On the 5th day, someone attempted to access the investigation folder using Priya's credentials at 2 in the morning. Calder's security system blocked the login because it came from a new device. The source address traced to the executive guest network in a residential building where Adrian leased an apartment. He claimed he had been working late and accidentally selected the wrong folder. The explanation was impossible. Priya's credentials had been entered, not his. Information security opened a separate incident. Adrian ordered them to close it as user error. Raymond refused. The conflict moved from quiet to structural. Adrian still controlled operations, but legal, information security, and internal audit no longer trusted his instructions. He responded by questioning my performance. He told Human Resources I had missed deadlines, resisted leadership, and allowed personal connections to distort a vendor review. None of those claims appeared in writing until after I disclosed Mallory's involvement. HR presented me with a performance improvement plan on the 7th day. It required me to complete the Northbridge review while excluding marketing records, report progress directly to Adrian despite Raymond's instruction, and improve my executive receptiveness. The plan was drafted by Adrian's chief of staff and backdated 2 days. I signed only to acknowledge receipt and wrote that I disputed its contents. Then I submitted a retaliation report through Calder's whistleblower channel, which routed outside management to the audit committee. Adrian had expected a frightened employee. He had forgotten my job consisted of recognizing controls people assumed no one used. At home, the performance plan had consequences almost immediately. Mallory brought up my employment before I mentioned it. She said she had heard Calder was cutting risk positions and suggested I consider resigning before a termination damaged my reputation. There was no legitimate way for her to know. I asked where she had heard it. She said a former client still had contacts at the company. When I requested a name, she accused me of interrogating her. The argument she had probably rehearsed arrived fully formed. I was secretive, emotionally absent, consumed by work, and suspicious of anyone who tried to help. I listened until she finished. Then I asked whether she wanted a divorce. Her expression changed, not with pain, but with alarm that I had moved ahead of the script. She said she wanted us to be honest with each other. I placed printed copies of the hotel photographs on the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Mallory looked at the image of Adrian's reflection as if the photograph had betrayed her by continuing to exist. She denied the affair first. Then she called it emotional, then brief, then over. Each version lasted only until I mentioned a fact it could not contain. Eventually, she admitted the relationship had begun 8 months earlier during her Calder consulting project. She said Adrian had been advising the private equity firm on Calder's restructuring and that they connected through professional conversations. She insisted his appointment as my boss was not planned. I showed her the message saying I would not understand until the decision was already made. She said it referred to our separation. I asked about Morrow Strategy Partners. That was the question she had not prepared for. She stood, knocked her wine glass against the table, and left the room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a new explanation. Morrow was a dormant company she had created for a potential rebrand. It had never received money. She refused to show me its accounts. I told her my attorney would request them. The word attorney ended the marriage more clearly than the photographs had. Mallory's face hardened. She said I had no right to investigate her. I reminded her I had learned about the entity through public records and our joint tax preparation. She accused me of using company resources. I recognized Adrian's language inside her accusation. I slept elsewhere that night. The next morning, Calder disabled my building access. HR said I had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into misuse of confidential data. Adrian alleged I had searched vendor systems for information about my wife to gain leverage in a divorce. He submitted screenshots showing queries under my username. The screenshots were genuine but misleading. Every query was within the Northbridge assignment, timestamped after the review began, and documented in my work log. Adrian believed the subject of the search converted authorized activity into personal misconduct. He also claimed I had concealed the marital conflict despite my written disclosure to Raymond. Priya protested. Raymond ordered the leave to be paid and prohibited anyone from altering the case files. The audit committee hired outside counsel. For the first time since the all-hands meeting, I had no work to do. That absence was unbearable. I sat in a rented apartment surrounded by boxes, imagining Adrian controlling the narrative inside Calder while Mallory controlled it among our friends. She told people I had discovered an innocent professional relationship and become obsessed. Adrian described me as a disgruntled spouse exploiting corporate systems. The story was effective because it contained my motive but erased their conduct. My divorce attorney filed the petition and obtained a temporary order preventing either of us from borrowing against the house or moving joint assets. Mallory responded by requesting exclusive occupancy, claiming my investigation made her feel watched. I had already left voluntarily, but the allegation warned me what would come next. 2 days before the temporary hearing, Mallory changed the locks and reported that several pieces of jewelry were missing. One was her grandmother's ring, which she usually kept in a ceramic box beside the bed. Another was a diamond bracelet I had never seen. Her affidavit implied I had taken them when I removed my belongings. I had photographed every room before leaving because my attorney told me separations involving hidden money often produced sudden disputes about property. The time-stamped images showed the ring inside its box after my final bag was packed. They also showed there was no diamond bracelet in the drawer where Mallory claimed she stored it. More importantly, our doorbell archive showed Adrian entering the house 3 hours after I left and departing with 2 hard-sided cases. Mallory had deleted the clip from the household account, but the security provider retained it under a 30-day recovery policy. At the hearing, her attorney withdrew the jewelry allegation rather than explain the video. The judge granted temporary use of the house to Mallory because she remained there, but ordered her to preserve the contents and allow a neutral inventory. He also prohibited both of us from deleting security footage or business records related to disputed assets. The neutral inventory found the ring in Mallory's office safe. That episode seemed small beside the corporate investigation, yet it changed how our friends viewed the separation. Mallory had told them she was frightened of my surveillance and that I was building a case out of ordinary details. Once the withdrawn theft accusation became known, some stopped repeating her version. Others did not. One friend, Celia, called to say she believed Mallory had made mistakes, but that I was escalating everything by involving lawyers. I asked what she thought I should have done after being falsely accused of stealing jewelry. Celia said she did not want to choose sides. Neutrality sounded dignified when stated in the abstract. In practice, it meant Mallory could make a claim, I could disprove it, and Celia would treat the claim and evidence as equally unpleasant contributions to conflict. I ended the call without arguing. Losing friends revealed less dramatic betrayals, but some of them cut almost as deeply. Then, our joint checking account dropped by $42,000. The temporary order allowed ordinary household and legal expenses, but prohibited extraordinary transfers. Mallory had moved the money to a client trust account controlled by a lawyer who represented Morrow, labeling it an advance for anticipated business litigation. Her divorce attorney claimed the transfer protected marital funds from potential Calder claims. My attorney filed an emergency motion. Bank records showed the client trust account had sent $25,000 to Adrian's criminal defense retainer within 24 hours. Mallory had used joint money, partly earned by me, to fund the lawyer advising the man trying to fire me. The judge ordered the full amount returned and required dual approval for future withdrawals. Mallory said she misunderstood the temporary order. Her Morrow lawyer said the transfer reflected a billing error. Adrian's attorney returned the money while denying he knew its source. I sat through the hearing with my hands folded and thought about every time Mallory had called me controlling for wanting to review our budget. She had not hated financial structure. She had hated structures that prevented private choices from becoming someone else's problem. Afterward, my attorney warned me not to mistake judicial orders for protection that enforced itself. We began weekly account reviews and requested formal preservation notices for Morrow's banks. The process was exhausting. Every precaution made me feel less like a person ending a marriage and more like an administrator closing a compromised system. Still, those precautions uncovered a spreadsheet Mallory had uploaded to her business accountant. It divided projected Northbridge income into columns labeled Home, Coast, Legal, and Transition. One line allocated T exit cushion at $75,000. At first, I thought the letter referred to me. It did. Messages later showed Mallory and Adrian planned to encourage me to resign, then offer a private severance payment from Morrow if I signed a broad release and agreed not to contact Calder about her consulting work. They had budgeted $75,000 to buy my silence after Adrian damaged my employment record. The insult was not only the amount, it was their belief that they could manufacture the emergency, then appear generous for selling me a way out. Outside counsel interviewed me for 6 hours. I gave them a timeline, access logs, disclosure emails, and the original scope Adrian had assigned. I also disclosed the affair because hiding it would damage my credibility. I did not provide Mallory's personal photographs, except the one identifying Adrian, and only after my attorney reviewed the request. The investigators asked a question no one at Calder had asked. Why would Adrian assign me to Northbridge if he knew my wife was connected to it? There were only 2 plausible answers. Either he did not know Northbridge would be flagged, which contradicted his effort to narrow the review, or he wanted me positioned to take responsibility when the irregularities surfaced. The second answer fit the timing. Adrian had accepted Calder's offer 6 weeks before his start date. During those 6 weeks, Northbridge submitted 9 invoices totaling $1.8 million. 7 were approved through emergency procedures. The approvals carried the digital authorization of the retiring COO, but he had been hospitalized during 4 of the dates and denied reviewing them. The workflow logs showed the approvals originated from an administrator account controlled by operations. Northbridge moved the money through 3 accounts. Some went to legitimate freight companies, creating the appearance of real services. The remainder moved to Morrow Strategy Partners and a second entity called Vale Advisory Group. From there, money paid the lease on Adrian's apartment, Mallory's business debts, luxury travel, and a deposit on a coastal house. The coastal purchase agreement listed Adrian and Mallory as joint buyers. They had planned a life financed partly by Calder, while discussing how to remove me from mine. The investigators did not tell me all of this at once. I learned pieces through interviews, court disclosures, and later board findings. The first undeniable link came from a document Mallory submitted in our divorce. To justify her income, she provided a consulting agreement between Morrow and Northbridge. It described branding work and showed payments of $320,000. The signature for Northbridge belonged to Elaine Cross. Elaine was Adrian's aunt. She lived in assisted housing and had no operational role in the company. Her name had been used to conceal ownership because Adrian could not appear on a Calder vendor while advising the private equity investor. During an interview, Elaine said Adrian asked her to sign formation papers for a small family business. She never saw invoices and received only $5,000. Mallory's divorce filing had authenticated the payment stream investigators were still working to prove. Adrian's response was to accelerate my termination. He prepared a memorandum alleging gross misconduct and asked the CEO to approve it before outside counsel finished. The CEO, Martin Kessler, had initially supported Adrian's restructuring, but Martin was cautious about personal liability, and the audit committee had warned him not to interfere. He refused to sign. Adrian then announced a reorganization eliminating my department. It would have removed Priya, reassigned information security, and transferred vendor compliance into operations under him. He presented it as cost savings. The board saw an attempt to dismantle every group preserving evidence. The audit committee suspended him that afternoon. News reached me through a formal letter restoring my system access for the limited purpose of assisting outside counsel. I did not return to the building yet. Priya and I worked from the law firm's offices, reconstructing Northbridge's approval chain from immutable logs and backup archives. That was where Adrian's plan finally became visible. He and Mallory had not begun with a grand conspiracy. The affair started during her legitimate consulting engagement. Adrian then directed a small project to Northbridge, using his aunt as nominal owner. Mallory supplied marketing work and received payment through Morrow. The first invoices were inflated but attached to real services. Success made them bolder. They added non-existent freight coordination, reused reports, and split payments below approval thresholds. When Calder's monitoring software flagged the pattern, Adrian learned the alert would route to my team. He could not erase it without drawing attention. Instead, he sought the COO position through the private equity investor and planned to control the review. Assigning it to me created multiple advantages. If I found nothing, the case closed. If I found Mallory, he could accuse me of conflict and misuse. If regulators later discovered the scheme, he could say a compromised investigator had concealed it to protect her wife. The performance plan and administrative leave were not improvised reactions. A draft termination memorandum had been created on Adrian's laptop 3 days before his first day as COO. It described me as having failed to disclose my wife's relationship with Northbridge before I had been assigned to review it. He had written my guilt before giving me the evidence. Outside counsel presented its preliminary findings to the board in an emergency session. I was not in the room, but Priya later described the silence after the slide showing the termination draft's creation date. Adrian's representatives argued he had prepared contingency documents because he anticipated conflicts. The board asked why a contingency document contained invented performance failures and a conclusion of intentional concealment. He had no credible answer. Calder terminated Adrian for cause and referred the matter to federal authorities because government contract funds had passed through Northbridge. The company also placed the chief of staff on leave and reviewed the private equity director's role in his hiring. One director resigned after emails showed he had ignored warnings from Adrian's former employer. My employment was reinstated. The performance plan was removed from my record. My leave was classified as protected whistleblower activity, and the board offered me a settlement for retaliation. The offer included money, a promotion, and a confidentiality clause broad enough to prevent me from discussing failures that affected public contracts. I declined the first version. For years, I had assumed survival meant accepting the safest available outcome, but returning quietly under Adrian's architecture would leave the same weaknesses for someone else to use. With my attorney, I negotiated a narrower confidentiality provision, independent reporting for operational risk, mandatory audit committee review of executive retaliation claims, and a fund to compensate employees whose bonuses had been reduced by the false Northbridge costs. The final settlement also paid my legal fees and granted me a promotion to director. I accepted only after Priya agreed the structure would outlast both of us. People later described that choice as triumphant. It did not feel triumphant when I walked back into Calder. Colleagues avoided my eyes because they had believed rumors, repeated them, or simply watched while my badge was disabled. Others approached with intense sympathy that required me to comfort them. My desk had been cleared into boxes. Someone had removed the plant Mallory gave me on our 5th anniversary and left it dying beside a copier. I threw the plant away. Mallory's position became impossible once Adrian was suspended. She first insisted Morrow's payments represented legitimate work. When investigators showed that her reports had been billed to Calder multiple times under different descriptions, she blamed Adrian. She said he controlled Northbridge and told her the payment structure was legal. In our marriage, she had presented herself as his equal. Under threat of prosecution, she recast herself as a manipulated contractor. The evidence supported neither extreme. Adrian designed the vendor structure, but Mallory created false deliverables, edited invoices, and opened accounts. Messages recovered from her laptop showed her calculating how much Calder's review threshold allowed each week. She also sent Adrian a copy of my travel schedule so they could use our house while I was away. That detail hurt more than the coastal property. I had spent months imagining anonymous hotel rooms as the location of their betrayal. Learning they had been together in our kitchen, our shower, and the bedroom where I still folded her clothes changed the physical meaning of home. I sold the house during the divorce rather than fight to keep it. Some spaces can be reclaimed. Others charge too much for the attempt. The divorce discovery process uncovered the financial timeline. Mallory had diverted more than $90,000 of her Northbridge income into accounts I did not know existed. Because the money came from fraud, I did not want a share. I wanted a clean accounting so no creditor or prosecutor could claim I had benefited knowingly. My attorney negotiated an order assigning all Morrow-related liabilities to Mallory and preserving my right to cooperate with investigators. I waived spousal support despite earning more because tying our futures together for another decade felt like a second sentence. We divided legitimate assets, sold the house, and communicated only through lawyers. At mediation, Mallory asked for a private conversation. I refused. She wrote a letter instead. She said the marriage had become predictable, that Adrian made her feel seen, and that the business opportunity grew around the relationship before she understood its danger. She accused me of loving systems more than people. Then she said my decision to investigate rather than confront her proved she had been right about my emotional distance. I read the letter twice. The accusation found the exact wound it was designed to reach. I had always been deliberate. I organized feelings before speaking because chaos frightened me. Mallory once said that quality made her feel safe. Now she used the same quality to explain why her betrayal belonged partly to me. My therapist asked a simpler question. If I had confronted Mallory the night before Adrian arrived, would she have told the truth? The evidence answered. She lied when shown photographs. She lied when asked about Morrow. She warned me to resign while Adrian prepared my termination. My caution did not create their deception. It prevented them from converting it into my ruin. I never answered the letter. Federal charges arrived 11 months after Adrian's suspension. He was accused of wire fraud, conspiracy, making false statements connected to government contracts, and obstruction. Mallory was charged with conspiracy and wire fraud. Elaine was not charged. Prosecutors described her as an exploited nominee who cooperated once she understood how her name had been used. Adrian fought the case. Mallory accepted a plea agreement. Her cooperation exposed more than Northbridge. At Adrian's previous employer, he had directed work to another hidden vendor and blamed irregularities on a procurement manager who was later fired. The amount was smaller, and the company had settled privately. The private equity director who promoted Adrian to Calder knew about the dispute but considered it a manageable reputational issue. That procurement manager had spent 2 years unable to find comparable work. Calder's outside counsel located her. Her testimony established Adrian's pattern of placing investigators or control employees near the misconduct, then using their proximity as evidence against them. Adrian eventually pleaded guilty to several counts rather than face trial. He received a prison sentence, restitution, and a prohibition against serving as an officer of a public contractor. Mallory received home confinement, probation, restitution, and community service. She lost most of her business and professional network. The Coastal House deposit was forfeited. I attended neither sentencing. Revenge did not require me to watch a judge describe consequences already visible in every part of their lives. Calder survived, though the scandal cost contracts and credibility. Martin retired earlier than planned. The board separated legal, risk, and compliance functions from operations. Priya became chief risk officer. I built a small investigations group with authority to report directly to the audit committee when executives were implicated. My first decision as director was to change how conflict disclosures worked. The old system asked employees once a year whether they had relevant relationships. It treated disclosure as a formality and assumed conflicts remained still. The new system cross-checked vendor owners, payment accounts, household disclosures, and executive affiliations while preserving strict access limits. It also allowed investigators to recuse themselves without surrendering their credibility or careers. The policy was not named after me. I insisted on that. For months, I struggled with the office where Adrian had sat. Calder converted it into 2 small interview rooms, but the hallway still carried the memory of his first week. I would pass the glass wall and see him asking whether Mallory created a conflict, already holding the answer he intended to use. Then a new case changed the association. An accounts payable clerk reported pressure from a regional vice president to approve a questionable distributor. She arrived in one of those interview rooms visibly afraid, carrying screenshots on her personal phone because she believed company systems might be monitored. Under the old structure, the complaint would have gone through operations. Under the new one, it came directly to my team. The distributor was legitimate, but the vice president had undisclosed debt to its owner. We suspended approvals, investigated, and resolved the matter before money moved. The clerk kept her job and received written protection against retaliation. When she thanked me, I understood that surviving Adrian was not the most meaningful outcome. Building a door someone else could use was. My personal life recovered more slowly. I rented a narrow townhouse near the river and furnished it without consulting anyone. For the first few months, every choice felt like evidence of loss. 1 coffee mug instead of 2, one side of the closet. No need to ask whether anyone wanted dinner. Then, solitude stopped looking like absence and began behaving like space. I learned how much of my life had been organized around Mallory's moods. She liked spontaneous trips, so I saved vacation days. She disliked financial conversations, so I monitored bills quietly. She said my work stories were too technical, so I shortened them until my days sounded empty. None of those compromises justified her affair. They did show me how thoroughly I had mistaken accommodation for intimacy. My mother asked why I had not told her sooner. Friends asked how I failed to see the affair for 8 months. Coworkers asked whether I had suspected Adrian before the announcement. Everyone wanted a moment in which the truth should have been obvious. The desire was understandable. If betrayal always announced itself, careful people could avoid it. But trust makes ordinary behavior possible. Mallory's late meetings resembled work because she had always worked irregularly. Her protected phone resembled client confidentiality. Her travel resembled ambition. I did not miss a single glowing warning. I watched familiar facts acquire new meanings after someone changed the context. That distinction allowed me to forgive myself. The final financial recovery from Northbridge took nearly 3 years. Banks returned some transfers. Insurers covered part of Calder's loss. Adrian and Mallory paid restitution from forfeited assets and future income. Calder could not recover the damaged contracts or the careers affected by distorted budgets. Fraud produces numbers, but its largest costs rarely fit inside them. The board asked me to present the case at a company ethics forum. I resisted because I did not want my marriage turned into corporate education. Priya suggested I discuss the control failures without personal details. I agreed on the condition that the presentation name no individual who had not been convicted or formally disciplined. I opened with the assignment Adrian gave me. I explained how fraud can recruit the person most likely to discover it, not by winning their cooperation, but by making their credibility part of the cover. I described selective scope, altered reporting lines, pre-written performance concerns, and pressure disguised as urgency. I told managers that retaliation rarely introduces itself as retaliation. It arrives as concerns about tone, teamwork, receptiveness, or fit, qualities vague enough to punish resistance without addressing facts. Afterward, employees sent me stories they had never reported. Not all described fraud. Many described supervisors using process as theater while decisions were already made. We could not fix every injustice, but we could stop pretending controls worked because policies existed. Mallory contacted me once after completing home confinement. The message came through my attorney and asked whether I would release several boxes stored during the sale of our house. The boxes contained her university notebooks, family photographs, and ceramics from her grandmother. They had no financial value and belonged to her. I released them. She then asked for the blue bowl we bought on our honeymoon. Technically, it had been assigned to me with the kitchen contents. I had kept it in a cabinet without using it because seeing it made breakfast feel like testimony. I sent that too. My attorney asked whether I was sure. I was. Keeping an object because someone else wanted it would have made revenge into a form of storage. 2 years after the scandal, I attended a healthcare operations conference in Seattle. During a panel, someone asked about the Northbridge case without knowing my personal connection. The speaker praised Calder's monitoring software for detecting invoice splitting. I almost corrected him. The software had produced an alert, but alerts do not save companies. People decide whether to preserve them, narrow them, bury them, or weaponize the person assigned to read them. Instead of interrupting, I raised that point during questions. The speaker agreed and asked where I worked. I said Calder. A few people in the room recognized my name. For once, recognition did not feel like exposure. After the panel, a woman named June approached me. She led compliance at a regional hospital network and wanted advice about reporting structures. We spoke for 20 minutes, exchanged cards, and continued the conversation over coffee the next morning. Months later, friendship became something more. I told her about Mallory before our relationship became serious. Not every document and courtroom detail, but enough that she understood why sudden secrecy affected me. I expected sympathy or reassurance. Instead, June asked what transparency looked like to me now. The question mattered because trust after betrayal cannot be built from permanent access. I did not want passwords, location sharing, or proof on demand. I wanted consistency between words and choices, room to ask without punishment, and the confidence that a difficult truth would not be delayed until it became profitable. We moved slowly. When June met my coworkers, no one made jokes about background checks. Priya simply welcomed her. By then, the scandal had become one item in Calder's history rather than the first sentence of mine. Adrian was released from prison years later. I learned from a routine news alert because his conviction remained connected to Calder. He gave an interview claiming corporate politics had exaggerated a consensual relationship and ordinary consulting mistakes. He described himself as a scapegoat for a company embarrassed by weak controls. The article included no comment from me. Older versions of myself would have wanted to correct every lie, but Adrian's plea, restitution order, emails, and termination records existed. He could narrate himself as misunderstood without changing what he had admitted under oath. I no longer considered his audience my responsibility. Mallory never spoke publicly. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she moved closer to her sister and found administrative work outside branding. I did not ask whether she was happy. Curiosity is not always a sign of unfinished love. Sometimes it is only a habit that deserves to fade. On the 5th anniversary of Adrian's first day at Calder, our investigations team held a planning retreat. No one else remembered the date. We reviewed closed cases, staffing needs, and a new protocol for vendor ownership verification. In the afternoon, I passed the conference room where he had been introduced. I stopped outside the glass. 5 years earlier, I had sat inside believing my life had narrowed to two people's secret. My wife and my boss seemed to control home, work, reputation, and money. Their coordination made them feel larger than any response I could make, but their power depended on isolation. Adrian needed me to report only to him. Mallory needed me to doubt what I saw. Both needed private explanations to outweigh shared records. The moment I used the structures available, legal counsel, documented disclosures, independent oversight, preserved logs, their story encountered people they could not individually manage. That lesson changed how I understood strength. I had once thought strength meant confronting betrayal without trembling. Now I knew it could mean waiting until your next action protected more than your anger. It could mean refusing to steal evidence, refusing to empty an account, refusing to become careless simply because careless people had hurt you. I did not win because I was unemotional. I won because I treated my emotions as signals, not instructions. The pain told me something was wrong. Fear told me the risk extended beyond my marriage. Anger gave me the energy to document what calmer parts of me wanted to avoid. Grief helped me release a home, a history, and a version of Mallory that had existed only because I kept supplying explanations for her. The final Northbridge file sits in Calder's secure archive. It contains thousands of pages, invoices, access logs, interview transcripts, account records, board minutes, and the termination memorandum Adrian drafted before becoming my boss. My personal divorce records sit elsewhere. The separation is deliberate. One file proves corporate fraud. The other records the end of a marriage. They intersect, but they are not the same story. That distinction is the part Adrian and Mallory never understood. They believed my love for one could compromise my duty to the other. They believed betrayal would make me either protect Mallory or attack Adrian, and either choice could be used against me. They built their plan around the assumption that I could not separate what I felt from what I was authorized to do. They were wrong. The man sleeping with my wife became my boss at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. By the end of that week, he had tried to turn my marriage into evidence against my career. By the end of the year, his own records had ended both his authority and their scheme. I lost a wife, a house, and the illusion that careful people can prevent every betrayal. I kept my name, my work, and the right to decide what the truth required of me. And when I walked out of that conference room 5 years later, I no longer saw the place where Adrian took control. I saw the place where he first mistook my silence for surrender.